All right. Hello, everybody. I see our friends signing on. I am here with the great Asha Rangappa, and we're going to get started in a moment. We're going to count it in, and then we're going to talk about not necessarily any one case or any one issue, but kind of what we see going on at the Department of Justice that I'm going to need Asha's help coming up with the appropriate analogy. I see it as a little bit of a shell game. I see it as a little bit of a three-card Monty, if you all are familiar with the three cards and the little misdirection where the dealer is always winning because there's always fraud and sleight of hand going on. I also see it as kind of a three-act play of lawlessness that just keeps circling through itself, but I'm not really happy with any of those descriptions. So we're going to try to come up with a better one, and let's count it down, and then we'll get started. 3, 2, 1. All right, everybody, welcome back. As you can see, we've got our friend Asha Rangappa here. And I'm thrilled to have her because every time I read one of her pieces on Substack, I learn something. I laugh a little bit because she's got a great sense of humor in her writing. And then I reach out to her and I'm like, can you please come on and explain this and let's puzzle through it together. So let me just briefly introduce Asha. So she is a lawyer. She's a former FBI agent. She's a senior lecturer at the Yale University Jackson School of Global Affairs. You've seen her on MSNBC, NCNN, NBBC, and NPR. She is on the board of editors at Just Security, which does remarkable deep dive legal analysis pieces. And I consider her to be the splainer of all things. And so I think the last time we talked may have been about Bolton, and you helped explain some of what was going on there. And maybe someday we'll do an update on that. It's been a little bit radio silent on the Bolton prosecution, which frankly I put in a slightly separate category as a whole bunch of the other vindictive prosecutions. But you can find Asha on Substack, The Freedom Academy with Asha Rangappa. And the piece that I just read, why I reached out to Asha, is decoding the OLC, Office of Legal Counsel, or decoding the DOJ word salad on Venezuela. And I read it, and Asha did yeoman's work trying to explain what this Office of Legal Counsel memo is, pretending like there's some legal authority to do what we did in Venezuela. And her piece makes clear that as much as she tried to unravel and make sense of the incomprehensible gibberish in that OLC memo, she couldn't do it. And I think that was by design with respect to the people who drafted it. But first of all, welcome, Asha. Rather than me just jumping right into it, I get so excited. Thanks for joining us. And tell people a little bit, just like the 30,000-foot view, what is OLC and what is it supposed to be doing?
So the Office of Legal Counsel is an office within the Department of Justice. It is there to provide, to advise the White House on kind of the legality of its policy decisions. Really, that's my understanding of it. And so, the lawyers there are supposed to be acting, as impartial, not impartial, but they have a professional responsibility to actually state what the law is, to be very clear so that the people that their client, the president, the White House, National Security Council, whatever, understand where the lines are, what's permissible, where there might be gray areas. They should, as Glenn, you can make, this is the strongest argument that would support X, decision. But you always provide a counter argument and you say, well, and here's what, where there could be vulnerabilities. And then you say, and here's what would totally be over the line. I think what we've definitely seen this over the years, Glenn, is, OLC has kind of morphed. It might depend on the administration, but we have seen in the past trying to basically be outcome determinative, right? Like, just find a way to find a legal justification for this. We saw this with the enhanced interrogation techniques in the W administration. These are the so-called torture memos that John Yoo and Jay Bybee wrote. I use those in my class as an example of legal sophistry because there's a lot of clever stuff in there. And actually, you read it, it's a little bit like a Jedi mind trick, and you're like, oh. And then you kind of go back and you're like, okay, I don't know that fully makes sense. So we've seen some of this. The OLC memo on Venezuela, like I couldn't even follow. Like it wasn't even persuasive in a, in a sophistry type of way. It just made no sense. And I think I don't know if you looked at that memo and
I only
even
read your piece, but I often rely on somebody who is familiar to our viewers here, Dan Maurer, who is a military law expert and taught constitutional law and criminal law at West Point and taught at the Army's JAG school down at UVA. Retired Army Lieutenant Colonel, career JAG, just really a brilliant professor, current law professor in Ohio, with a deep well of experience. And when I first asked him about our invasion, our operation into Venezuela, I said, I don't want to characterize it, Dan. What would you call it based on your expertise? And he said three words that still rattle around in my brain. He said, we launched a war. And he concluded, and he did an analysis under every conceivable body of law, domestic, international, the law of war. And he said, it's unlawful, plainly, inarguably unlawful. But then you have this OLC memo at DOJ that says it's all good to go. And let me talk about some of the other OLC memos that people may be familiar with. You said the torture memo. And you said, it's almost like a mind trick. You read it, and you read the arguments, which are kind of specious. They have some superficial appeal, but it's like, so at the end, it's like torture is good or okay or lawful. Has that ever been revisited by subsequent administrations that torture is good?
I believe that those memos have been rescinded. I mean, John Yoo was investigated by the Office of Professional Responsibility because he misstated the law. Like, I mean, it was specious, as you said. He was, I think they found that he had kind of crossed the bounds of his professional responsibility. That's what they were kind of looking at. Like, was this a plausible legal argument, or was this kind of just a lot of, as you said, mumbo jumbo, a shell game, to kind of make this? He was not sanctioned, and he's now tenured professor at Berkeley. So, I mean, I guess, but they did take a look at it. So I don't think that is still in effect, but there's all these other OLC memos. So for example, with regard to Venezuela, there's the one that Bill Barr wrote in 1989, which basically says, the U.S. can effect extraterritorial arrest and the military can help with that. It's a law enforcement operation, and they can do this even if it violates customary international law and the UN Charter. Remember that this was written just a few months before we invaded Panama. So it's like we have, there's like kind of a paper trail. Another memo is the Bush administration tried to use these World War II precedents to find a place where the habeas corpus clause wouldn't reach. That's how they chose Guantanamo Bay. They thought that there you could just switch the light off on the Constitution. The Supreme Court pushed back on that, but you can see that these are ways where sadly, where lawyers get together and kind of figure out how to justify something that the president wants to do, which is not exactly how they should be operating, but is clearly how they are operating in this administration.
So, it seems like these OLC memos are designed to give people cover for whatever it is a particular administration might want to do. And, they can give legitimate cover because it's an honest assessment of the law that's being presented to them. Or they can just kind of come up with this incomprehensible word salad and say, yeah, we have arguments for why these things are lawful, which is kind of reminiscent of all of these ridiculous excuses and explanations that we got for the deadly boat strikes on these Venezuelan boats in international waters. It's like, well, we're in an armed conflict with people, even though they're not necessarily armed, and we're not really in conflict with them. But it's self-defense because they could, gas up 4 times and finally make it to our shores, and so we're defending ourselves. And it's all, I would use the legal term, bullshit. It's all bullshit, and that bullshit sometimes seems to take the form of an Office of Legal Counsel memo. And one of the more infamous ones is the 1973 memo, the first of a series of memos saying you can't prosecute a sitting president for crimes he commits, which, if he can just summarily order the unlawful detention of all his political opponents and we can't prosecute him for that, that doesn't feel right. That doesn't feel like what our democracy should be all about. But so these OLC memos, I think in part, are designed to sometimes give legitimate legal opinions, but other times just give an administration top cover. This thin sheen of lawfulness to do whatever they damn well please. And then that kind of breaks. So another one I think we've just seen is OLC said, Lindsay Halligan, good to go as U.S. attorney. And we now know that was dead wrong. We had a federal judge rule that she was unlawfully and unconstitutionally appointed. We had a Trump-appointed Judge David Novak just reject her legal filing, argue in favor of the lawfulness of her appointment. And I think one of the arguments was, hey, OLC said it was good to go. And of course, she just was declared to be masquerading, that's the judge's word, as a U.S. attorney, and she promptly resigned. She quit the Department of Justice. So these OLC memos, particularly in this administration, seem nefarious, really. But once an OLC memo is out there, like the one that you completely dissemble on Venezuela, and the administration starts acting in accordance with what the OLC memo says it's okay to do. Pam Bondi, for example, puts that operation into effect, and they go out and do all of these things. Then on the back end of it, maybe people should be held accountable if it turns out they were doing things that were either unlawful or unethical. And there is at least an office at DOJ designed to police up allegations of attorney misconduct, the Office of Professional Responsibility, OPR. But now that is another place that it feels like unethical attorney conduct goes to die. So can you talk a little bit about what OPR is supposed to do, and then what do we think it's doing presently?
Yeah. So first, one of the people on the call called it the Office of Legal Cover, which I think is a great
Oh, brilliant.
one. I'm going to have to use that. So OPR is the Office of Professional Responsibility. I think, Glenn, you can probably speak to it better in terms of what it does for, the justice, for the attorneys. I mean, OPR also oversaw FBI agents. If there was any question of misconduct in terms of, for FBI agents, OPR would be involved. Even when there were investigations into, for example, a discharge of a firearm, OPR would be involved. So they are looking to ensure that the people, the attorneys, the agents are all they're essentially the compliance department, right? Like they are ensuring that everybody is in compliance, both with internal policy and their, in the case of attorneys, their professional responsibilities as well. And so it is really the only internal oversight. I mean, I guess there's the inspector general.
But I think they deal with non-attorney DOJ employees at the Office of the Inspector General. And I think attorney misconduct is dealt exclusively with in OPR.
Yeah, I mean, agent misconduct was dealt with
And
OPR.
agent, yeah.
Yeah, so that is really the only internal oversight. And to your point, Glenn, I think people should understand what it means when lawyers provide legal cover, right? Because that's a green light for other people to go along. What your military friend said about the invasion of Venezuela, I agree with. I think that it was unlawful. I don't think there's any way you can slice it where it's lawful. Really, all of those service members were following illegal orders. I don't know that there's any way around it. However, there's no way for them to, if they from hear from on high, well, the lawyers have said that it's okay, right? This is where we're getting into some of the Milgram experiment stuff, right? Like where the authority person says that it's and that authority is a lawyer. And this is why it's so dangerous when lawyers become part of the complicity scheme, right? Where they give the legal sanction. It's why, where they're supposed to be the bulwarks against this, and we have the famous Shakespeare quote, the first thing you do is kill all the lawyers. Well, you don't need to kill all the lawyers if you can get them to come up with, janky legal arguments, that justify what you're doing.
And when we have somebody like Pete Hegseth, I was an Army JAG active duty for 6.5 years. So I am not an expert like Dan Maurer, but I know a thing or two about the responsibilities of JAG officers. And it is in part to advise the command on what is lawful and what is not, to keep the command and the soldiers, sailors, airmen, seamen out of hot water, out of trouble. And, when you have a guy like Pete Hegseth who says the JAGs are an impediment to what we want to do, they're an impediment to, quote, maximum lethality, which is Pete Hegseth's goal. And I guess it's with minimum legality or no legality at all. But I mean, it tells you everything about the mindset of this administration when they believe that the lawyers who are there to give them the best advice to keep them out of trouble and to keep them from violating the law are getting pushed aside, And boy, are they endangering our troops. They are endangering our military members because if our military members ultimately obey an unlawful order, they could be court-martialed. If they disobey a close call, but it turns out to be a lawful order, they could be court-martialed. It's like we are putting them in a trick bag, and there is a bedrock principle that I was taught first at officer basic training, and then it was reinforced at the Army's JAG school. We must disobey, obviously, patently unlawful orders. And it seems like some of our military commanders may sort of be going astray of that absolute bedrock obligation.
Which is
So
why, by the way, it's especially, alarming with Trump's potentially invoking the Insurrection Act, and putting the military in a place where they're then allowed to engage in law enforcement operations, perhaps with, dubious legal parameters that they're given, in terms of what they can do and what they can't do.
So kind of going back to this game of three-card Monte, the way I see it kind of organizationally is you've got OLC giving them the Office of Legal Cover. I love that
I
too.
love that too.
Giving them top cover kind of nefariously, dishonestly, disingenuously. And then you have Pam Bondi, who is having her lawyers go into court and do things that, you know, seem at a minimum unethical. You have judges who are calling out DOJ lawyers and courtrooms all around the country as providing misleading arguments, mischaracterizing evidence, not being candid with the court. Um, and then the mechanism that's supposed to be designed to take care of that, the Office of Professional Responsibility, seems to be neutered. And here's why I say that. I think I know the last four directors of the Office of Responsibility. I worked with them all, and I was good friends with some of them because they all came from my former office, the DC U.S. Attorney's Office. Marshall Jarrett, Mary Pat Brown, Robin Ashton, Jeff Ragsdale. These are people that I worked with for decades. The last director of OPR, Jeff Ragsdale, was there from 20 to 25 as the head of OPR. And I think he was the one that I sent my referral letter to when Judge Reggie Walton ruled that Bill Barr mischaracterized the Mueller report, spun the Mueller report, that Bill Barr's assertions to the American people about the Mueller report were contradicted by the Mueller report. Those are quotes from Reggie Walton's findings. I sat down, I did an OPR referral of Bill Barr. I sent it to the director, Jeff Ragsdale. He sent me acknowledgement of receipt, and I don't know whatever happened to it, but we had a honest, ethical, operational Office of Professional Responsibility. I have been looking online and everywhere else. Jeff Ragsdale was frog marched out of his office as the head of OPR several months ago. There is not even a director that I could find, but I would bet that I'll bet my full buck, that's my betting limit, that there is no legitimate
I don't think so.
attorney oversight going on at the Office of Professional Responsibility. So they're being given authority on the top end, on the front end by OLC. Pam Bondi's telling them to go to court and do it, like Lindsay Halligan. Go sign your name, U.S. Attorney Lindsay Halligan, even though you are no more the U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of Virginia, as is Bugs Bunny. And then ordinarily it would be investigated, Lindsay Halligan's at least ethical misconduct by OPR. That seems to be gone. So it's like they're co-opting all of the
Well, and you know that it's not there, Glenn, because that's why we're seeing all these resignations.
yeah.
Right? Because the resignations are happening, and they've been happening since this administration started, because there's no one there that there's no deterrence, for example, like within the agency. And there's no fear that they're gonna, there's nothing to hold them accountable, as you said. Because a lot of what we're seeing, I mean, forget, well, I guess not forget, but in addition to like Lindsay Halligan, the failure to investigate Renee Good's shooting, that there was New York Times reporting that there were an FBI agent did begin to look into it, and that was quashed. I mean, you can't do that. You can't just stop an investigation without, that. I would imagine that itself would warrant some kind of OPR inquiry. You look back at times, like, for example, when the FBI buried the, investigation into Larry Nassar. They just didn't pursue it the OPR looked into that. And the Inspector General, I think, also looked into that as well. So you have that. You have, whatever Todd Blanche, I think what he did with Ghislaine Maxwell. I mean, all of this stuff, I just can't see it flying in a normally functioning Justice Department. And I think that's why these lawyers get to a point where they have the only accountability mechanism is their own legal code of responsibility and conscience.
And
Right?
the other things that might lead to accountability, though not today, bar counsel, because, all of these attorneys who are engaged in unethical conduct in court or elsewhere, and they're caught doing it, should be referred to their own state bar. There's no such thing as a federal license to practice law. Every single DOJ lawyer has a license to practice law from a particular state. I have mine from New Jersey. And so just as we saw Rudy Giuliani disbarred twice over, both jurisdictions in which he held a law license, and Kenneth Chesbrough and Jeffrey Clark and John Eastman, all these people, that hopefully is accountability to come in the future. And then the other thing is, once the rule of law comes back into the light of day, and I have to believe it will, there are going to be, investigations into what these people have been doing. The Renee Good thing is such a great example. I'm glad you brought it up. Kristen Clark, the former chief of the Civil Rights Division at DOJ, said, "It is our solemn duty," those are her words, "to investigate allegations of excessive force, police-involved shootings resulting in death. It is our solemn duty to investigate that." And like you, I was interested to hear that an FBI agent properly opened a probe, and then somebody, ordered it closed and probably unlawfully terminated the FBI agent who opened it. I don't know that, but I think that's a safe assumption given this administration's MO. So I hope there will be criminal investigations, if adequately predicated, in the future for what these people are doing today. I mean, we sit here and the Department of Justice is gleefully in violation of the Epstein Files Transparency Act in multiple ways. And there doesn't seem to be any accountability for it. I just read Judge Engelmayer's opinion, and he left a little crack of light open. He said, listen, this says nothing about the representatives Rokana and Thomas Massey's ability to file a
File a
lawsuit. They're
lawsuit.
right.
Yeah.
They're right to file a lawsuit, and I hope that's joined by the victims. So we'll have a belt and suspenders standing in place. But what is we know where we are. We are in a really dark place on the rule of law front. Where do you find your hope and optimism, and do you see any prospect for things to improve moving forward?
Well, one thing, Glenn, I know a lot of people that are watching this are discouraged, right? And sometimes I'll post on Blue Sky and I'll say, this is illegal. This is not how things are done. This is violation of this policy. And I'll get these people who are like, it doesn't matter anymore. The rule of law is gone and, they're just going to do. And it matters for exactly what you're talking about. We must keep a record of every transgression because there will come a time where we might be able to do something. To throw your hands up now and just say it doesn't matter, well, then forget it. Why are we even talking to each other right now? You know what I'm saying? I think what people need to understand is we need to document all of this. And also, how people need to fully comprehend how many layers of accountability have actually been dismantled. So for example, with the Renee Good murder, I mean, I think the opening the criminal or civil case, is, kind of the outer bounds. I y I can only go by what happens in the FBI, but like I said, if you discharge your firearm, there is an automatic investigation internally. So to me, like, that hasn't happened. We're seeing that the Attorney General guidelines, which you and I have talked about before, which guide investigations, those seem to be out the window because you're not allowed to open investigations based solely on people's speech. And they're doing that all over the place. They are doing that with Governor Walsh. They're doing it with, I guess, Renee Good's wife. I mean, so a lot of these are out the window. But when you and we point out all the ways in which things are not normal, I think it's important. Even if we can't do something about it right now, there will be some kind of truth commission or truth and reconciliation. I mean, there has to be, right? After all of this, where we are at now beyond the pale.
That together with our version of the Nuremberg trials, there has to be accountability if we are to move forward as a democracy. And I agree with you. I get so much feedback because people get really angry sometimes when I keep saying justice matters. Well, if it didn't matter to you, you wouldn't be so angry about it. So it really does matter. And the other thing is, they want us defeated and depressed and despondent. They want us to stop fighting. They want us to throw up our hands and say, it doesn't matter. I won't give them that satisfaction. If,
Neither.
if only for that reason, I'm going to keep fighting. But you're exactly right. We have to document because we're going to right this American ship. I believe it's not over. And once we do, then if we don't fight for accountability a hell of a lot harder than we fought the last time in the Merrick Garland Department of Justice, then shame on us. We don't deserve to keep our republic because we've learned something from that failure. So we're going to have to fight once, the rule of law is a thing again.
Absolutely.
All right, Asha, thank you for joining us.
Yeah.
And
Always fun to be on with
next
you.
time you write something, I will pester you again because I love your writing. Tell everybody where they can find your work.
Yes, you can come find me at the Freedom Academy. It's on Substack. You'll see the piece that Glenn just mentioned, and I have other speakers on. So I hope that you will join.
Thank you. All right. Thanks, everybody. I'll see you at tonight's community meeting. Take care.
Take care.